I spent my birthday weekend with a friend who promised to spoil me. It was a nightmare. She served herself full plates while giving me breadcrumbs, made me sleep squeezed between two teenage strangers on a tiny couch, and treated me like an unwelcome burden. When I confronted her, her response shattered our friendship forever. My name is Jessica, and I'm 30 years old. I have high-functioning autism and a history of depression, which makes social situations challenging for me. But I've always believed that real friends accept you for who you are, support you through tough times, and celebrate your victories. I thought Brittany was that kind of friend. I was devastatingly wrong. Brittany and I met 3 years ago at a community pottery class in downtown Denver. She was this vibrant, outgoing person who seemed to have endless energy and captivating stories to tell. I was immediately drawn to her confidence, the way she could walk into any room and immediately become the center of attention without even trying. As someone who struggles with social interactions and often feels invisible in group settings, I found her ability to connect with people almost magical. She was everything I wished I could be: spontaneous, charismatic, effortlessly social. In the beginning, our friendship felt like a breath of fresh air in my otherwise quiet and predictable life. Brittany would invite me to coffee dates at quirky local cafes, art gallery openings where she knew the artists personally, and intimate dinner parties at her cozy apartment filled with succulents and vintage furniture. She seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings, always asking how my week went, if my therapy sessions were helping, and whether I needed anything. When I finally worked up the courage to tell her about my autism diagnosis, she didn't flinch or treat me differently like so many others had. She just nodded thoughtfully and said, "That explains why you're so careful and thoughtful about everything you do. I really love that about you, Jessica." Those early months of our friendship were filled with hope and what felt like genuine connection. Brittany would text me random memes at 2 in the morning that reminded her of our inside jokes, and she always remembered tiny details about my life that most people forgot within minutes of hearing them. She knew I preferred texting over phone calls because sudden rings made me anxious. She remembered that I couldn't handle certain textures in food and would always check restaurant menus beforehand when we planned to eat out together. She even learned about my special interests in marine biology and would send me articles about new deep-sea discoveries that she thought might fascinate me. Our friendship had this beautiful rhythm to it. We'd meet every Tuesday at the same corner table in our favorite coffee shop, where Brittany would order her usual caramel macchiato and I'd get my plain black coffee with exactly 2 sugars. She'd tell me about her latest dating adventures or workplace drama, and I'd share updates about my therapy progress or the documentary I'd been watching about octopuses. It felt balanced, comfortable, safe. But looking back now, I can see the early warning signs that I chose to ignore at the time. There were subtle moments when Brittany's attention would drift if I talked too long about something that interested me. She'd start checking her phone or suddenly remember something urgent she needed to do. When I'd suggest activities based on my preferences, like visiting the aquarium or going to a quiet bookstore, she'd agree, but then somehow the plans would always change to something more her style. A loud concert instead of the quiet museum. A crowded bar instead of the cozy cafe I'd mentioned. There was also this pattern with money that made me uncomfortable. Brittany was always talking about being broke, about struggling to pay rent or buy groceries. She worked part-time at a yoga studio and did some freelance graphic design, but her income was unpredictable. I understood financial stress. I'd been there myself during college, so I started picking up the tab more often. Coffee dates, lunch, movie tickets. She'd always protest initially, saying things like, "Oh no, you don't have to do that," or "I can pay for myself," but then she'd let me pay anyway. And somehow, she always had enough money for the things she really wanted: new clothes, expensive skincare products, weekend trips with other friends. I told myself I was being supportive. That's what friends do, right? They help each other out during tough times. And Brittany was always so grateful, always promising she'd make it up to me somehow. "You're literally the best friend ever, Jessica," she'd say, squeezing my arm. "I'm going to spoil you so hard when I get back on my feet." Those words made me feel needed, valued, important in a way I'd never experienced before. For months, I held on to that promise. Every time I paid for something, every time I listened to her complain about money while she bought things she didn't actually need, I'd remember her words. She was going to spoil me. She was going to make it up to me. She cared about me the way I cared about her. The invitation came in late February, about 6 months after we'd become close friends. Brittany texted me on a Wednesday evening while I was meal prepping for the week. "Hey babe. So I have this amazing idea. My cousin has this cabin up in the mountains, about 2 hours from the city. What if we spent your birthday weekend there? Just the 2 of us, no distractions. I could finally spoil you like I've been promising. Cook all your favorite foods, give you the relaxing weekend you deserve. What do you think?" I stared at that text for probably 10 minutes before responding. My birthday had always been a complicated day for me. Growing up, my parents tried their best, but they never quite understood how to celebrate in a way that felt comfortable for me. Too many people, too much noise, too much unexpected chaos. As an adult, I usually spent my birthday alone, maybe treating myself to a nice dinner or a new book. The idea of someone wanting to celebrate me, to actually plan something special just for me, was overwhelming in the best possible way. That sounds incredible, I typed back. Are you sure though? I know money's been tight for you lately. Don't even worry about that, she replied almost immediately. This is my gift to you. Let me handle everything. All you need to do is show up and let me take care of you for once. Those words sent warmth flooding through my chest. Let me take care of you for once. It was everything I'd been hoping to hear from someone, everything I'd been craving without even realizing it. Someone who wanted to care for me the way I'd been caring for others my whole life. Over the next few weeks, Brittany would bring up the trip constantly. She'd tell me about all the foods she was planning to cook, how she was going to run me a bath with fancy bath salts, how we'd watch movies and just relax together. She painted this picture of the perfect, peaceful weekend where I wouldn't have to worry about anything except enjoying myself. I've been researching all these recipes, she told me one Tuesday at our usual coffee shop. Remember how you mentioned you love that pasta dish from Romano's? I found a recipe that's supposed to be even better. And I'm going to make that chocolate cake you had at your coworker's birthday party, the one you said was the best cake you'd ever tasted. The fact that she remembered these tiny details, these passing comments I'd made weeks earlier, made me feel so seen and valued. This was what real friendship looked like, I thought. This was someone who truly cared about making me happy. A week before the trip, I started to worry about the financial aspect again. I knew Brittany was struggling, and here she was planning this elaborate weekend for me. So I decided to offer to help with expenses one more time. Hey, are you sure you don't want me to contribute anything for the weekend? I asked during one of our coffee dates. I could at least pay for the groceries, or gas for the drive up there. Brittany's reaction was swift and firm. Jessica, no. Absolutely not. This is my gift to you, remember? I told you I wanted to spoil you, and I meant it. If you pay for stuff, then it's not really me taking care of you, is it? She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Trust me on this, okay? Let me do this for you. I felt a little guilty for even asking, like I was somehow insulting her generosity or questioning her ability to follow through on her promise. So I backed down and tried to push the worry out of my mind. She wanted to do this for me. She insisted on doing this for me. Who was I to argue with someone's desire to be generous? The night before we left, I was so excited I could barely sleep. I packed carefully, bringing comfortable clothes and a few books, some herbal tea that helped with my anxiety, and a small gift for Brittany to thank her for planning everything. It was a little succulent in a hand-painted pot, something I'd picked up at the farmer's market because I knew she loved plants. Friday morning came, and Brittany picked me up at exactly 9 a.m. as planned. She was in a great mood, singing along to the radio and telling me stories about her cousin's cabin. How it was surrounded by pine trees, how there was this huge stone fireplace, how peaceful and secluded it was. The drive up was beautiful, winding mountain roads, glimpses of snow-capped peaks, the kind of scenery that made you feel like you were entering a different world. When we arrived at the cabin, I was struck by how charming it was. A small log structure nestled among tall evergreens, with a wraparound porch and big windows that let in streams of golden afternoon light. It felt like something out of a magazine, the perfect place for a peaceful birthday celebration. This is amazing, Brittany, I said as we carried our bags inside. Thank you so much for arranging this. Of course, she replied, though I noticed she seemed a little distracted, already moving around the cabin and checking things out. So tomorrow's the big day. Are you excited? I was excited. More excited than I'd been about a birthday in years. That night, we ordered pizza and watched a movie, and everything felt normal and comfortable. Brittany seemed genuinely happy to be there with me, asking about my work and listening to my answers. I went to bed that night with a warm feeling in my chest, grateful to have a friend who cared enough to plan something special just for me. I should have known that feeling wouldn't last. Saturday morning, my actual birthday, I woke up around 8:30 to the sound of Brittany moving around in the kitchen. I could smell coffee brewing, and for a moment, I thought maybe she was preparing some kind of special birthday breakfast. I took my time getting dressed, expecting to come out to a table set with something delicious and maybe even a happy birthday greeting. Instead, I found Brittany rushing around, throwing things into her purse and looking stressed. Oh good, you're up, she said without looking at me. We need to run out and grab some stuff. I forgot a few things for tonight's dinner. Oh, I said, looking around the empty kitchen. Should I make some coffee first? Or maybe we could grab breakfast somewhere. We don't really have time, she said, still not making eye contact. The store closes early today, and I want to make sure we get everything we need. I felt a small pang of disappointment, but I pushed it down. Maybe she had something special planned for when we got back. Maybe the real celebration would happen later. So I grabbed my jacket and followed her out to the car, my stomach rumbling quietly. The grocery store trip was rushed and chaotic. Brittany seemed frazzled, grabbing items quickly and not really including me in any decisions about what we were buying. When we got to the checkout line, she started patting her pockets and looking through her purse with an increasingly panicked expression. "Oh no," she muttered. "I think I forgot my debit card." My heart sank a little, not because of the money, but because I could see where this was heading. After weeks of her insisting she wanted to pay for everything, after all her promises about spoiling me, we were about to have the exact conversation I'd been dreading. "It's okay," I said quickly. "I can get it." "Are you sure?" she asked, but she was already moving toward the card reader. "I'll pay you back as soon as we get home, I promise." I nodded and pulled out my credit card, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling growing in my stomach. It was fine. These things happen. She'd make it up to me in other ways throughout the weekend. On the drive back to the cabin, Brittany seemed to relax a bit. She turned up the music and started talking about her plans for the evening. "I'm going to make this amazing shrimp scampi," she said. "And that chocolate cake I told you about. It's going to be perfect." When we got back to the cabin, it was already past noon, and I was genuinely hungry. I hadn't eaten anything since dinner the night before, and my blood sugar was starting to drop. But instead of lunch, Brittany handed me a protein bar and a Starbucks Frappuccino she'd grabbed at the store. "This should hold you over until dinner," she said, already busy unpacking groceries. "I want to make sure I have plenty of time to prepare everything perfectly." I stared at the protein bar in my hand. It was the kind of generic, chalky bar you grab when you're desperate, not something you give someone on their birthday. Meanwhile, I watched Brittany pull leftover pizza from the fridge and make herself a full plate, adding some fruit and the fancy cheese we'd just bought. "Are you going to eat that here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and non-confrontational. "Oh, this? I'm just having a quick snack," she said, settling down at the kitchen table with her full meal. "I'm starving. I didn't eat much yesterday." I stood there holding my protein bar, watching her eat what looked like a substantial lunch, while my stomach continued to growl. This wasn't how I'd imagined spending my birthday afternoon, but I didn't want to cause conflict. Maybe she was just stressed about preparing dinner. Maybe she'd make it up to me later. So I ate my protein bar in silence and tried to focus on how nice the cabin was, how peaceful it felt to be away from the city. I settled into a chair by the window and tried to read one of the books I'd brought, but I was having trouble concentrating. The hunger was distracting, but more than that, something just felt off about the whole situation. Around 3 o'clock, Brittany started preparing dinner. "Want to help?" she asked, which surprised me a little. This was supposed to be my relaxing birthday weekend where she took care of everything, but I was hungry and bored, so I agreed. For the next hour and a half, I found myself doing a lot of the actual work. Brittany would start tasks and then get distracted or remember something else she needed to do, leaving me to finish chopping vegetables, cleaning shrimp, and stirring sauces. It wasn't terrible, I actually enjoy cooking, but it wasn't exactly what I'd expected from a weekend where someone else was supposed to be spoiling me. The shrimp scampi was finally ready around 7:30, and I had to admit it smelled amazing. We sat down to eat, and for a while, things felt normal again. The food was delicious, Brittany was chatty and seemed to be in a good mood, and I started to relax a little. Maybe the earlier weirdness had just been stress about wanting everything to be perfect. After dinner, we cleaned up together and settled on the couch to watch a movie. I was feeling full and content, and I found myself getting excited about the cake Brittany had promised. She'd been talking about this chocolate cake for weeks, describing how rich and decadent it was going to be. I kept waiting for her to get up and start preparing it, but as the movie went on, she seemed completely absorbed in the plot. Finally, around 9:30, I worked up the courage to ask about it. "Hey, should we think about having some cake soon?" I said as casually as I could manage. Brittany looked at me with a slightly annoyed expression. "I'm still really full from dinner," she said. "Can we wait like 30 or 40 minutes? "Sure," I said, though I felt a little deflated. It was already getting late, and I'd been looking forward to this moment all day. But I understood being too full for dessert, so I settled back into the couch and tried to focus on the movie. 40 minutes passed. Then an hour. Then an hour and a half. Every time I glanced at Brittany, she seemed completely relaxed and content, showing no signs of remembering her promise about the cake. Finally, at almost 11:30, I couldn't wait any longer. "Do you think we could have the cake now?" I asked, trying to keep any hint of frustration out of my voice. Brittany sighed heavily, like I was asking for something unreasonable. Fine, she said, pausing the movie. I guess we can do that now. The way she said it made me feel like I was being demanding or pushy, like I was ruining her relaxing evening by asking for the birthday cake she'd promised me. I almost told her to forget about it, but I'd been looking forward to this small celebration all day. So I followed her into the kitchen and watched as she pulled a store-bought chocolate cake out of the refrigerator. It wasn't the homemade cake she'd been describing for weeks. It was a basic grocery store cake, the kind you can pick up in the bakery section for $15. That was disappointing enough, but what happened next was even worse. She cut 2 pieces of cake, put them on plates, and handed me one without any ceremony whatsoever. No candles, no "happy birthday" song, no acknowledgement that this was supposed to be a special moment. She just handed me the plate with the same energy she might use to offer me a leftover sandwich. There you go, she said, her tone flat and almost resentful. I stood there holding my piece of cake, feeling completely deflated. This was my birthday celebration? This was the spoiling she'd been promising me for months? A store-bought cake served with obvious reluctance at nearly midnight? Thanks, I managed to say, though my voice came out smaller than I intended. We ate our cake in silence, and the whole experience felt surreal. I'd been imagining this moment for weeks, a sweet, intimate celebration with my closest friend, maybe some heartfelt conversation about how much our friendship meant to both of us. Instead, I felt like I was inconveniencing Brittany by existing in her space. After we finished eating, she immediately started cleaning up, moving around the kitchen with sharp, efficient movements that suggested she wanted this interaction to be over as quickly as possible. I offered to help, but she waved me off with a curt, "I've got it." We went back to the living room to finish the movie, but the mood had completely shifted. I sat on my end of the couch feeling invisible and unwanted, wondering how my birthday weekend had gone so wrong. When the movie ended, I suggested we watch something else, hoping to salvage some kind of positive interaction from the day. "What did you have in mind?" Brittany asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't particularly interested in my opinion. I suggested a few movies I'd been wanting to see, but she dismissed each one with comments like, "That looks boring," or "I'm not in the mood for that." Finally, she just picked something herself without asking for any more input from me. It was a romantic comedy I'd already seen and didn't particularly enjoy, but I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. As we settled in to watch her choice, I tried one more time to create some kind of connection between us. The whole day had felt off, and I was starting to worry that I'd done something wrong without realizing it. "Hey," I said softly during a quiet moment in the movie. "Have I been a good houseguest this weekend? I hope I haven't been too much trouble." I was genuinely asking because I wanted to understand what was happening between us. Had I somehow offended her? Was there something I should be doing differently? I was trying to open up space for honest communication, the way my therapist had taught me to do when relationships felt strained. But Brittany's response shut down any possibility of real conversation. "I'm not even going to respond to that," she said in a condescending tone that I recognized from previous interactions when she was irritated with me. The way she said it made me feel small and foolish, like I'd asked something inappropriate or manipulative. I sat there in stunned silence, feeling completely confused and hurt. I'd asked a simple question about whether I was being a good guest, and she'd responded like I'd committed some kind of social crime. I spent the rest of the movie in my own head, trying to figure out what was happening. Was this how she really felt about me? Had our entire friendship been some kind of performance on her part? I kept thinking about all the times I'd paid for meals, all the hours I'd spent listening to her problems, all the ways I'd tried to be supportive and caring. Had none of that mattered to her? Around 11:30, just as I was starting to think the day couldn't get any worse, I heard voices outside the cabin. Brittany perked up immediately, like she'd been expecting this. "Oh, that must be Tyler and Mason," she said, jumping up from the couch. "Who?" I asked, completely confused. "Tyler and Mason," she repeated, already heading toward the front door. "They're these kids I've been mentoring. Well, they're not really kids anymore, they're like 17 and 18, but I've known them since they were younger. They're staying nearby this weekend, and I thought they might stop by." I felt a chill run through me. "You didn't mention that anyone else was coming." "It's not a big deal," she said dismissively. "They probably won't stay long." But even as she said it, I could tell from her body language that she was excited about their arrival in a way she hadn't been excited about anything else all day. She opened the door with genuine enthusiasm, greeting Tyler and Mason with warm hugs and animated conversation. These were 2 teenage boys I'd never met, and suddenly they were in our space, and Brittany was giving them the kind of energy and attention she'd been withholding from me all day. For the next hour, I sat on the couch feeling completely invisible while Brittany chatted with Tyler and Mason about people I didn't know and experiences I hadn't shared. They were clearly comfortable with each other, and I was obviously the outsider in this dynamic. Every attempt I made to join the conversation was met with polite but brief responses before the focus shifted back to their shared jokes and memories. Around 12:30, now well into the day after my birthday, Brittany dropped the news that would become the final straw. "So, here's the thing," she said, turning to me with a casual tone that didn't match the magnitude of what she was about to ask. "Tyler and Mason need a place to crash tonight. Their original plans fell through. Would it be okay if they slept in the living room with you?" I stared at her, certain I must have misunderstood. "With me?" "Yeah, there's that pull-out couch. It's pretty big. You guys could all fit." I looked at the couch she was referring to. It was not pretty big. It was a small love seat that would be cramped for 2 people, let alone 3. And she was asking me, on my birthday weekend, after a day of being treated like an afterthought, to share sleeping space with 2 teenage boys I'd just met. "I don't really feel comfortable sleeping with 2 strangers," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "They're not strangers," Brittany said impatiently. "I've known them for years. They're good kids. But I don't know them," I clarified. "And it's a really small space." I could see Tyler and Mason looking uncomfortable with the conversation, probably picking up on the tension between Brittany and me. I felt bad that they were caught in the middle of this, but I also felt like I was being backed into a corner. "It's just for one night," Brittany said, and there was an edge to her voice now. I told them they could stay. The way she said it made it clear that this wasn't really a request. She'd already made the decision, and I was expected to go along with it. On my birthday weekend. In the space that was supposed to be about celebrating me and giving me a relaxing, comfortable experience. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what was happening. This was supposed to be my special weekend. Brittany had promised to spoil me, to take care of me, to make this birthday different from all the lonely ones I'd had before. Instead, I was being asked to give up my sleeping space to accommodate her spur-of-the-moment decision to host 2 teenagers. But what choice did I have? Tyler and Mason were already here. Brittany had already made the promise to them. If I said no, I'd be the bad guy who kicked out 2 kids who needed a place to stay. The whole situation had been orchestrated in a way that made it impossible for me to advocate for myself without looking selfish and unreasonable. "Okay," I said quietly. "I guess that's fine." "Great," Brittany said, immediately brightening. "You guys are the best." For the next hour, I helped set up the pull-out couch while Brittany continued chatting with Tyler and Mason. When we finally went to bed around 1:30 in the morning, I found myself squeezed into the middle of a narrow mattress between 2 teenage boys I'd never met before today. Tyler was on my left, Mason on my right, and I had maybe 18 inches of space to call my own. I lay there in the dark, listening to them breathe, feeling completely humiliated and invisible. This was how my 30th birthday had ended, crammed between 2 strangers on a tiny couch, after a day of being treated like an inconvenience by someone who claimed to be my friend. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time one of the boys shifted in their sleep, I felt crowded and uncomfortable. But more than the physical discomfort, I was wrestling with the emotional reality of what had happened. This wasn't just a series of unfortunate coincidences or miscommunications. This was a pattern of behavior that revealed something fundamental about how Brittany saw me and our friendship. I kept thinking about all the promises she'd made. The spoiling, the pampering, the celebration focused entirely on me. Instead, I'd paid for our groceries, prepared most of our dinner, waited hours for a store-bought cake served without ceremony, been dismissed and condescended to when I tried to communicate, and finally been asked to give up my sleeping space for unexpected guests. As I lay there in the dark, squeezed between Tyler and Mason, I realized that this weekend had shown me exactly where I stood in Brittany's priorities. And it wasn't anywhere close to where I'd thought I was. Sunday morning came too early. I woke up around 7 with a crick in my neck and Tyler's elbow digging into my ribs. Brittany was already up, moving around the kitchen and talking quietly with Tyler and Mason. When I finally extracted myself from the couch and made my way over to them, I found her preparing a full breakfast spread: eggs, bacon, toast, fresh fruit. "Morning, birthday girl," she said with forced cheerfulness. "Sleep okay?" I looked at the breakfast she was preparing and felt another wave of confusion and hurt. Where had this energy been yesterday? Where had this care and attention been when it was actually my birthday? "Fine," I said, though my back was aching and I felt exhausted. "Good. So I have a surprise for you today," she announced, seeming genuinely excited for the first time all weekend. Despite everything that had happened, I felt a small spark of hope. Maybe she realized how poorly the previous day had gone. Maybe this was her attempt to make things right between us. "What kind of surprise?" I asked cautiously. "You'll see," she said with a mysterious smile. "Just get ready, and we'll head out after breakfast." I ate quickly, suddenly eager to see what she had planned. Maybe we were going somewhere special, somewhere that would give us a chance to reconnect and talk about what had happened. Maybe she wanted to apologize or explain her behavior from the day before. After breakfast, we said goodbye to Tyler and Mason, who were heading back to wherever they'd come from. Then Brittany and I got in the car, and she drove us about 40 minutes to a small coastal town I'd never visited before. "This place is so cute," she said as we walked down the main street lined with little shops and cafes. "I thought you'd love it." It was cute, and under different circumstances, I would have loved exploring it with a friend. But I was still feeling raw and confused from the previous day, and I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk about what had happened. Instead, Brittany seemed determined to act like everything was normal, pointing out interesting shops and telling me about the town's history. We stopped at a little candy shop, where Brittany immediately began filling up 2 large bags with various chocolates and gummies. I watched her shop with the same enthusiasm she'd been lacking all weekend when it came to anything related to me. At the checkout counter, she placed both bags on the counter and looked at me expectantly. "Oh," I said, realizing what was happening. "Are we splitting these?" "Well, these are both for me," she said casually. "But you can get yourself something if you want." I stood there processing this moment. She'd brought me to a candy shop, filled up 2 bags of treats for herself, and then told me I could buy my own candy if I wanted some. This wasn't a treat or a surprise for me, it was a shopping trip for her that I was apparently invited to participate in at my own expense. I ended up buying myself a small chocolate bar and a coffee, trying to push down the growing realization that this entire surprise was just another example of Brittany prioritizing her own wants while expecting me to be grateful for being included. We walked around the town for another hour, during which Brittany continued to act like we were having a wonderful time together. She took selfies of us, posted them on social media with captions about our amazing weekend getaway, and generally performed the role of a devoted friend. But I felt like I was watching her from outside my own body, like I was participating in some elaborate charade. Around noon, she suggested we get lunch at a little seafood restaurant overlooking the water. We were seated at a nice table with a beautiful view, and for a moment, I thought maybe this was when we'd finally talk. Maybe over lunch, she'd acknowledge that things had been weird and we could clear the air. Instead, as soon as we sat down, she started looking at the menu with a concerned expression. "Everything here is so expensive," she murmured, flipping through the pages. "I don't know if I can really afford this." I felt that familiar sinking feeling in my stomach. After everything that had happened, after all her promises about spoiling me and taking care of me, we were heading toward the same dynamic that had defined our entire friendship. She would express concern about money, I would feel guilty and offer to pay, and she would accept while making it seem like she was doing me a favor by allowing me to be generous. "I can get lunch," I said quietly, because what else could I do? We were already at the restaurant, we'd already been seated, and she'd already made it clear that she couldn't afford to pay. "Are you sure?" she asked, but she was already relaxing back into her chair and looking at the menu with renewed interest. "Yeah, it's fine," I said, though it wasn't fine. Nothing about this weekend had been fine. Over lunch, I finally worked up the courage to address what had been bothering me. I waited until we'd ordered and had some privacy, and then I tried to bring up the previous day as gently as possible. "Can I talk to you about yesterday?" I asked, my heart pounding. I felt like some things were a little off, and I wanted to understand what happened. Brittany looked at me with a guarded expression. "What do you mean?" "Well, like at lunch yesterday. You made yourself a full plate of food, but you gave me just a protein bar. And I was really hungry. You could have made yourself more food," she said immediately. "I'm not your mother. You know where the kitchen is." "But you said you wanted to take care of me this weekend," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "You said you wanted to spoil me and cook for me. So I was trying to follow your lead." "I made dinner," she said defensively. "I spent hours making that shrimp scampi." "That's true, and it was delicious," I acknowledged. "But I helped cook most of it. And then when I asked about the cake you'd been promising, you seemed annoyed with me." "I wasn't annoyed," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I was just full. I wanted to wait until the boys got there so they could be part of the celebration too." This was news to me. "You knew Tyler and Mason were coming?" "Well, I thought they might stop by," she said evasively. "But you didn't tell me that. You planned my birthday celebration around people I'd never met, without letting me know they'd be involved." Brittany sighed heavily, like I was being unreasonable and exhausting. "Look, Jessica, I don't know what you want me to say. I did my best to give you a nice weekend. I'm sorry if it wasn't perfect enough for you." The way she said it made me feel like I was being ungrateful and demanding. But I knew I wasn't asking for too much. I was asking for the basic consideration and care that she'd promised me, the same consideration I'd been giving her for months. "I'm not saying it needed to be perfect," I said carefully. I just felt like there was a disconnect between what you promised and what actually happened. What exactly are you accusing me of? She asked, and now there was real irritation in her voice. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm trying to understand why you seemed so different this weekend. Why you seemed annoyed with me, why you made decisions that affected me without including me in them. You're being really dramatic about this, she said dismissively. So the weekend didn't go exactly as planned. These things happen. I still did my best to show you a good time. I sat there looking at her across the table, realizing that we were having completely different conversations. I was trying to talk about feeling hurt and dismissed and invisible. She was defending herself against accusations I wasn't making and minimizing experiences that had been deeply painful for me. Do you think maybe we just have different ideas about what it means to take care of someone? I asked, making one last attempt at understanding. I think you have unrealistic expectations, she said bluntly. I'm not a mind reader. If you wanted something specific, you should have asked for it instead of expecting me to guess. I felt something break inside me at those words. For months, I'd been bending over backward to anticipate her needs, to support her financially and emotionally, to be the kind of friend who noticed when she was struggling and stepped in to help. And now she was telling me that wanting the same kind of consideration in return was having unrealistic expectations. You're right, I said quietly. I should have been clearer about what I needed. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. I hadn't needed anything complicated or expensive or difficult. I'd needed to feel valued and considered and cared for. I'd needed her to follow through on the promises she'd made. I'd needed her to treat me with the same kindness and attention I'd been showing her. We finished lunch in awkward silence, and then drove back to the cabin to pack up our things. The drive home was equally quiet, filled with tension and unspoken hurt. Brittany seemed to think the conversation at lunch had resolved everything, but for me, it had only confirmed what I'd been afraid to admit to myself. When she dropped me off at my apartment Sunday evening, she gave me a quick hug and said, "Thanks for such a fun weekend. We should definitely do this again sometime." I nodded and smiled and said all the appropriate things, but inside I was reeling. Had we really just experienced the same weekend? Did she genuinely think it had been fun? Or was she just committed to maintaining the fiction that everything was perfectly normal between us? That night, I sat in my apartment trying to process what had happened. I kept replaying moments from the weekend, trying to understand how someone could promise to spoil and care for their friend and then deliver such a painful experience instead. I thought about the protein bar while she ate a full meal, the hours of waiting for a store-bought cake served without ceremony, the condescending response when I tried to communicate openly, and finally being squeezed between two strangers on my birthday night. But what hurt the most was the conversation at lunch, when she dismissed my feelings and made me feel like I was being unreasonable for expecting basic consideration and kindness. It was like she'd rewritten the entire narrative of our friendship in her head, casting herself as the generous friend who'd done her best and me as the ungrateful one who couldn't appreciate her efforts. I started to think about other moments in our friendship with this new perspective. How many times had I paid for things while she complained about being broke, only to watch her buy expensive items for herself the next week? How many times had my suggestions been ignored or dismissed, while her preferences always took priority? How many times had I listened supportively to her problems while she seemed bored or distracted when I shared mine? The pattern had been there all along, but I'd been too hopeful, too desperate for connection, to see it clearly. I'd interpreted her selfishness as quirky spontaneity, her dismissiveness as busy distraction, her financial irresponsibility as temporary struggle that I could help her through. I'd been making excuses for her behavior because I wanted so badly to believe that someone truly cared about me. Over the next few days, I found myself feeling angry in a way I hadn't experienced before. Not just hurt or disappointed, but genuinely angry at being treated so poorly by someone who claimed to care about me. I was angry at Brittany for making promises she had no intention of keeping, for taking advantage of my generosity and kindness, for making me feel small and insignificant on what should have been a special day. But I was also angry at myself for allowing it to happen. For being so eager to please that I'd ignored my own needs and boundaries. For paying for things I couldn't really afford because I wanted to maintain a friendship with someone who clearly didn't value me the same way I valued her. For accepting crumbs of attention and affection when I deserved so much more. Tuesday came around, and for the first time in months, I didn't go to our usual coffee shop. Brittany texted me around our normal meeting time. "Hey, where are you? I'm at our table with your usual order." I stared at that text for a long time before responding. Part of me wanted to just show up and pretend everything was normal, to slip back into the comfortable routine we'd established. It would be easier than confronting the reality of what our friendship had become. But I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't sit across from her and pretend that the weekend hadn't happened, that I wasn't hurt, that everything was fine between us. I can't make it today, I texted back. I have some things I need to take care of. Oh no. Are you okay? Did something happen? The concern in her message would have felt genuine a week ago. Now it felt performative, like she was playing the role of a caring friend without actually caring about the answer. I'm fine, I replied. Just need some space to think about things. She didn't respond to that, which told me everything I needed to know. If she genuinely cared about our friendship, if she'd had any awareness of how the weekend had affected me, she would have asked what I needed to think about. She would have checked in, tried to understand what was going on with me. Instead, her silence confirmed what I'd already realized. She was only interested in me when I was convenient, supportive, and undemanding. The moment I needed something from her, even just acknowledgement of my feelings, she disappeared. Days turned into weeks, and Brittany didn't reach out again. No phone call to see how I was doing, no text to ask if I wanted to reschedule our coffee date, no attempt to repair whatever had gone wrong between us. It was like our entire friendship had just evaporated the moment I stopped being available on her terms. This silence was actually a gift, though I didn't recognize it at first. It gave me space to really examine our relationship without the distraction of her charm and manipulation. I started keeping a journal, writing down memories of our interactions and looking for patterns I'd missed before. I remembered the time she'd invited me to her birthday party, but then spent the entire evening focused on other friends while I sat alone in the corner. I remembered how she'd ask for my advice about problems in her life, but then get irritated if I offered solutions instead of just agreeing with whatever she wanted to hear. I remembered countless meals where I'd paid the bill while she ordered the most expensive items on the menu without any apparent awareness of the financial burden she was placing on me. Most painfully, I remembered all the times I'd been vulnerable with her about my struggles with autism and depression, sharing things I'd never told anyone else, only to have her respond with distracted nods or immediate subject changes to her own problems. She'd never once asked follow-up questions or checked in on me during difficult periods. She'd never shown any real interest in understanding my experiences or supporting me through challenges. I'd been so focused on being the friend I thought she needed that I'd never stopped to consider whether she was being the friend I needed. And the answer, I now realized, was a resounding no. About a month after the birthday weekend, I ran into Brittany at the grocery store. I saw her before she saw me, and for a moment I considered ducking into another aisle to avoid the interaction. But something in me had shifted over those weeks of silence and reflection. I wasn't the same person who'd been willing to accept scraps of friendship and call them a feast. Jessica, she called out when she spotted me, her voice bright and cheerful as if nothing had ever happened between us. Oh my gosh, I've been meaning to text you. How have you been? I've been good, I said neutrally, not moving closer or showing any of the warmth I might have displayed in the past. Good, good. Listen, I know things were a little weird after the cabin trip. I've been thinking about it, and I realize maybe I was stressed about hosting and didn't give you the attention you deserved. I'm sorry about that. It was an apology of sorts, but it missed the mark entirely. She was framing what happened as her being a little distracted, not as a fundamental betrayal of trust and friendship. She was minimizing the entire experience, making it sound like a minor miscommunication instead of a weekend of deliberate selfishness and disregard. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully. But I think what happened that weekend was more than just stress or distraction. What do you mean? She asked, and I could see her defenses starting to go up. I mean that you made promises about taking care of me and spoiling me, and then you did the opposite. You let me pay for groceries after insisting you wanted to cover everything. You served yourself full meals while giving me snacks. You made me wait hours for a store-bought cake and then acted annoyed when I asked about it. You invited strangers to sleep in my space without asking me first. They weren't strangers to me, she said, latching on to the least important part of what I'd said. Tyler and Mason needed a place to stay. But they were strangers to me, I replied. And it was supposed to be my birthday weekend. The weekend you promised would be about celebrating me. I could see her getting frustrated, the same way she had during our conversation at the restaurant. She didn't want to hear about my experience or acknowledge how her actions had affected me. She just wanted me to accept her limited apology and move on. Look, I said I was sorry, she said, her tone becoming sharper. I don't know what else you want from me. I wanted you to be the friend you claimed to be, I said simply. I wanted you to care about me the way I cared about you. I do care about you, she insisted, but there was no conviction in her voice. No, I said, and I felt surprisingly calm as I said it. You care about what I can do for you. You care about having someone who will listen to your problems and pay for your meals and make you feel good about yourself. But you don't actually care about me as a person. She stared at me for a moment, clearly not expecting this level of directness from me. In the past, I would have backed down, apologized for being too sensitive, found a way to smooth things over and preserve the relationship. But I wasn't that person anymore. That's not true, she said weakly. When's my birthday, Brittany? I asked. She blinked, clearly thrown by the question. What? My birthday. The birthday we just celebrated. What date was it? I watched her face as she realized she didn't know. She'd planned an entire weekend around my birthday, had spent weeks talking about celebrating me, but she'd never bothered to actually learn the date. It was that weekend we went to the cabin, she said, avoiding the question. It was March 15th, I said. And you never asked. In all the weeks you spent planning this big celebration for me, you never once asked when my actual birthday was. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of this revelation. She'd been so focused on the performance of being a good friend that she'd missed the most basic element of actually being one. Jessica, it's okay, I said, and I meant it. I understand now who you are and what our friendship meant to you. I just wish I'd understood it sooner. I started to walk away, but she called after me. So that's it? You're just going to throw away 3 years of friendship over one bad weekend? I turned back to look at her one last time. I'm not throwing anything away, Brittany. I'm just finally seeing what was never really there. Walking away from her in that grocery store was one of the hardest and most liberating things I'd ever done. For months afterward, I kept expecting to feel regret or doubt about ending our friendship. I kept waiting for the loneliness to become unbearable, for the desperate need for connection to drive me back to accepting whatever scraps of attention she was willing to offer. But that feeling never came. Instead, I felt lighter, freer, more authentically myself than I had in years. I started spending time with people who actually wanted to know about my interests, who remembered details about my life, who celebrated my successes and supported me through difficulties. I discovered what it felt like to have friends who saw me as an equal rather than a convenient source of financial and emotional support. I also started setting better boundaries in all my relationships. I stopped automatically offering to pay for things when people complained about money. I stopped accepting plans that were entirely based on other people's preferences. I stopped apologizing for having needs and expectations in my friendships. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong in a relationship. I'd spent so much time second-guessing myself with Brittany, wondering if I was being too sensitive or expecting too much. But my instincts had been right all along. I had been expecting too much, from the wrong person. Now, when I think about that birthday weekend, I don't feel angry anymore. I feel grateful. Grateful that Brittany showed me so clearly who she really was. Grateful that I finally found the strength to walk away from a relationship that was hurting me. Grateful that I learned I deserved better, and that better was actually possible. That weekend taught me that real friendship isn't about grand gestures or elaborate promises. It's about consistent consideration, genuine care, and mutual respect. It's about showing up for each other in small, everyday ways. It's about remembering each other's birthdays and caring enough to ask questions and being present for both celebrations and struggles. I spent my 31st birthday exactly the way I wanted to, quietly, peacefully, surrounded by people who actually knew when it was and cared about making it special. My friend Maya made me a homemade cake and remembered that I don't like surprise parties. My neighbor brought over my favorite coffee and sat with me while I opened cards from family members who live far away. It was simple, genuine, and exactly what I needed. As I look back on everything that happened with Brittany, I realized that the most important lesson I learned wasn't about her at all. It was about me. It was about recognizing my own worth and refusing to accept less than I deserved. It was about understanding that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who makes you feel invisible. Brittany taught me what friendship isn't. And in learning that painful lesson, I finally understood what real friendship could be. For that, despite everything, I suppose I owe her some gratitude. Just not the kind she was expecting.